4:40 August 22nd, 1917. St. Julien, east of Ypres. In the dark, the tank's engine coughs, then steadies. Inside the steel box, Second Lieutenant George Hill leans into the driver's tillers. Sergeant Robert Francis Misson braces his shoulder against a sponson frame. The name chalked on the hull is a joke that tastes like home, Fray Bentos, a brand of tinned beef, a reminder of kitchens far from Flanders. 9 men inside, 2 6-pounder guns. 3 machine guns, 40 millimeters from the outside world at best, often less. At 4 to 5 miles per hour, the box moves. By 9, 2 days later, the box will be empty. 1 man will be dead. 8 will be wounded. Its guns will be stripped of their locks and the maps gone. In between, more than 60 hours in no man's land, under fire from both sides, a tank turns strong point by accident. Not mobility, but endurance. Not shock, but stubbornness. The attack is simple on paper. Fray Bentos, F-41, serial number 229, a Mark IV male, supports the British 61st Division near St. Julien. The German positions carry code names that stick: Somme-Farm, Gallipoli, concrete and machine guns in low, wet ground. The plan pairs infantry and armor, line abreast, to bully pillboxes at dawn. That's the idea. At first light, the tank rolls. The crew tick off procedures learned hard since 1916. Watch the ground. Avoid shell holes whose edges look thin. Keep the unditching beam ready on the roof. The hull is 28 to 29 tons of riveted plate, driven by a 105 horsepower engine, bolted inches from their knees. The air is a mix of exhaust, warm oil, and cordite dust. They talk in shouts. They talk with knocks. They talk by habit. Somme-Farm blinks, muzzle flash, and the left 6-pounder answers. Short, adjust, fire again. A German gun falls quiet. The tank crawls onward, a blunt finger pressing a map square. Then at 5:45, the luck runs out. Machine gun fire licks the cab. Hill jerks back at the controls, hit in the neck, and Fray Bentos slews. The weight shifts. A track edges over a crater lip that looks solid but isn't. The tank goes in sideways, steeper and deeper, the nose down. The driver's seat pitches. Captain Donald Hickling Richardson lunges to take the controls, but the box is already sliding. The tank settles into the hole and will not climb out. This is the pivot. A vehicle becomes ground. A plan becomes improvisation. The crew react by the book. Try the unditching gear. Misson cracks the right sponson door, takes a breath of cool air that smells like mud and distance, and reaches for the heavy beam. Bullets hit the plate with flat, angry claps. He looks across a few dozen yards and sees the men firing. He drops back inside. On the left, Lance Corporal Ernest Hans Brady tries the same and is hit, killed under terrible machine gun fire. The beam stays on the roof. The tank will not move today. Richardson takes stock. Hill is bleeding but conscious. Gunners Percy Edgar Budd and William Morey are also hit. Others have cuts, bruises, blast ringing in their ears. The tank, though, is still a weapon. 2 6-pounders in the side sponsons, Lewis guns on pintles and imports, rifles, revolvers. A steel box that resists rifle fire and shell splinters even as it bakes its crew. At 7, British infantry fall back. That changes everything. The map says the tank should be behind friendly lines. Reality says otherwise. Fray Bentos sits in no man's land, nose down, a visible lump in flat ground cut by shell holes and drainage ditches. German soldiers angle toward it in rushes, then creep closer when fire slackens. The tank answers with short-barreled blasts that shatter cover, and with the mutter of Lewis guns when the angles allow. Where the gun cannot reach, rifles can. Misson notes later that Germans tucked in so close under the bow that the crew shot through the cab's small revolver flap. It is precise, unpleasant work. Short angles, short distances, short targets. The pressure comes from another direction, too. British rifles and machine guns, now somewhere behind, take the stranded tank as a threat. The silhouette is German in their sights, a box in the wrong place at the wrong time. Misson volunteers to crawl back under fire, hundreds of yards on a belly slick with mud, to tell the infantry not to shoot. The crew experiment with a handkerchief tied to a cleaning rod, a white rag waved from a porthole. Sniping eases. It does not stop. By late morning on the 22nd, the crew accepts a new job description. Hold. Keep the Germans from swarming the tank, from using it as cover, from stripping weapons and sights, from pulling a trophy out by moonlight. Keep themselves alive long enough to leave on their terms, not the enemy's. Each hour is a new drill. Adjust fire. Watch the angles. Rotate the men at the worst positions. Save the last clean bandage for the next wound. Count ammunition not in boxes but in handfuls, then in digits. The world outside the hull is waterlogged ruin. Third Ypres. The British call it the Third Battle of Ypres. Passchendaele, others say, naming the ridge and the suffering. Rain has turned clay into paste. Drainage is wrecked. Craters fill and overflow into runnels that look like trenches. Pillboxes sit on low rises like teeth built from reinforced concrete poured thick, doors set to catch flanking fire, apertures that cover each other with saw-like fields of bullets. The Mark IV was meant to solve this geometry. Go where men cannot, flatten wire, smash a door, make a hole in a wall of fire. But ground matters. In August 1917, ground is mud, and mud takes payment. Inside the tank, time stretches and compresses. Minutes race during attacks, then drag while the crew count breaths between shots. Heat builds, then ebbs when hatches crack under cover of smoke or darkness. Exhaust hangs, cordite cords throats. Oil makes hands slick. Each man knows the routine of his corner. Misson's drills at the right sponson, the feed and stoppage checks for the Lewis, the awkward reach to the 6-pounder breech. Richardson moves, not a hero's dash, but a captain's necessary circuit. Wound checks, whispers, where the ammo sits now, who has the cleanest trigger finger, whether Hill can hold a posture without bleeding harder. That first day, the Germans test the box with rushes. Squad size, a few dozen men at most, probing the ground, learning the angles of the tank's guns, asking whether the crew will break. They do not. Near evening, the firing changes register, farther, heavier, British guns trying again to reach past Fray Bentos to the German line. Shell bursts lift mud fountains and throw rain back into the sky. The tank hunkers, steel ringing like a drum when close shrapnel hits. The crew suck air through teeth and wait for the next short rush to close the gap. It does. They answer. Night falls at last. The tank changes shape. Without silhouettes, targets are sound and motion. Wristwatches flicker in cupped palms. Those not at the guns lean back against plates that sweat with condensation on the inside and fog on the outside. Someone turns a canteen cap with fingers so cramped the click seems loud as a shot. Food is scarce. Water is measured in mouthfuls. Every opening to the outside is a risk. Every minute wasted is danger creeping closer. August 23, 1917. Dawn again, gray and low. The crew have survived the first 24 hours. The tank's left 6-pounder has a rhythm now. Traverse, elevate, fire. Count the recoil and the shiver in the frame. Recover sight, fire again. On the right, the sponson doors open and close in a beat dancers would hate. Swing, fire, slam, lock. Swing, fire, slam, lock. The gun teams swap roles to rest bruised shoulders. The driver's seat sits empty for stretches. Hill still alive, still bleeding, still climbing back to the controls when needed. Budd and Maury work through pain because there is no alternative. The Germans shift tactics, fewer frontal rushes, more pressure from the flanks and from dead ground. A handful of men use a communications trench to reach the forward edge of the tank and press in tight, close enough to touch steel. That brings a different threat. Grenades and bombs pushed into cracks, lit fuses tucked into apertures. The crew respond at inches, revolvers and rifles through the small ports. A Lewis gun fired downward until the barrel smokes. Ricochets ping around the interior when angles betray them. A spray of clay, a shout, then quieter. The tank remains. Friendly fire remains too. British soldiers, seeing movement around the box, pour rounds into the area. Waving a white rag buys a lull. It also risks drawing attention. Misson belly crawls again and again to carry the same message to new faces in new shell holes. That hulk is ours. Stop shooting. We will leave. We will make it out. The logic is simple, but the fog of battle is stubborn. At one point, with shells walking nearer, Misson runs the gauntlet in daylight to get a word to British troops that their own guns are endangering the tank. He makes it back. Not bravery for display, but a systems fix by a sergeant who understands that the threat in front is not the only one. By afternoon of the 23rd, 60 hours is no longer a statistic. It is a grind of minutes. Rifles are hot enough to burn palms. The Lewis guns want fresh barrels. The 6-pounders need men with backs that still bend like springs. Maury fights on despite injury. Binley, the one man who will leave physically untouched but in shock, acts as runner, loader, spare hands wherever they're needed. Names become roles. Then roles become functions. A fortress thinks in functions. Across the map, other tanks are fighting the same terrain. Some burn, hit by field guns sighted for the purpose. Some bog and are abandoned early, crews dragging gun locks and papers away under cover of shell bursts. Some reach their pillbox targets and chop them open with point-blank shells. The difference with Fray Bentos is not just luck. It is that the ditching came within reach of both enemy and friend, in ground that allowed neither side to claim the box easily. That unique geometry turns a 5-minute mishap into a 3-day battle. Tanks in 1917 are new. They do not carry radios. Their best communications are flags, runners, and the language of artillery. They obey standing orders written by men who understand what a captured tank would mean. Remove the breech blocks, the locks, from the 6-pounders before you leave. Strip the Lewis guns. Take the maps. Deny the enemy any part of the machine they can use or learn from. These rules are more than bureaucracy. They are the spine that will keep the crew's decisions straight when fatigue erases judgment. Email or after-action reports will later assemble the award citations. Military crosses to Richardson and Hill, distinguished conduct medals to Misson and Maury, military medals to Hayton, Arthurs, Budd, and Binley. The numbers embedded in those decorations are blunt. 1 crew, 9 men, 8 wounded, 1 killed, 3 days, dozens of close-range engagements, a tank held in place by mud and will. Night 2 runs longer. The light refuses to leave the horizon. The wait of hours is worst before midnight. The crew ration movement to preserve silhouettes. Every scrape may be feet outside. Every thud could be a man on the hull or an impact in a crater. Someone laughs once, a dry cough more than a laugh, at the tank's name, the sweetness and irony of canned food painted on a machine that has become a fortress and a pantry of ammunition. The name is no accident. Richardson, a grocer by trade before the war and an agent for the brand, chose it because it meant something to him. A grocery label becomes a banner of survival. August 24th begins with rain. The tank becomes a drum again. The air inside feels cooler, then clammy. Steam, breath and rain and hot metal rolls out when a port opens. The Germans try again mid-morning, working from the direction of Gallipoli objective, then from low ground behind a communications sap no larger than a ditch. The Mark IV's angles, once a problem, now help. Nose down, the guns point in odd arcs that create dead zones for the enemy and tiny fields of fire for the crew. It is the mathematics of angles and nerves. They win another exchange, then another. From the British side, a discussion is taking place. What to do about the stranded tank if the Germans try to take it? The practical answer is denial. If you cannot rescue it, destroy it. That threat is kept in the crew's mind by each near fall of shell. Misson's runs matter again. The white rag matters. The habit of thinking ahead matters most. If we must leave, how, when, in what order, with what in our hands. By late afternoon on the 24th, Richardson decides. The costs are compounding. Ammunition is limited. Wounds accumulate. The crew have done enough and more. Waiting longer only favors the enemy. The decision has its own logic. Night favors movement. The nearest British infantry who can cover a withdrawal belong to the 9th Battalion, the Black Watch. If they can reach those Scots, if they can clear the few hundred yards across mud and shell holes without a last burst of friendly fire or a gust of German machine gun, they can get out. The final hours are the tightest coil. Before 2100, the crew quietly strip the guns. Breech locks come free, heavy and awkward in the dark, and vanish into bags and pockets. The Lewis guns are checked and rechecked. Maps fold and refold until corners crack. Each man assigns himself weight, a weapon, a lock, a magazine, a tool, a final responsibility. They are all wounded to some degree now. They move anyway. 2100, August 24th. The moment arrives. One by one, in a line that will matter if the first falls, the men drop from the sponson door into the bottom of the shell hole and then up the slippery far side. Noise is betrayal, so is stillness. They scuttle and pause, counting seconds with their lungs. A flare lifts somewhere and the world becomes theater. They flatten. A low raked voice in German calls and is answered. It fades. Mud sucks at boots. A Lewis gun slides, is caught. Silence becomes a stare. Then ahead, a hissed challenge in English. The Black Watch's shapes rise from the earth. Friends. They arrive as a group -1. Ernest Brady's body was never recovered. His name is on the Tyne-Cot Memorial. Percy Budd, wounded here and surviving this week, will not live to see peace. He dies on August 25, 1918, aged 22. James Binley, the only man untouched but shocked, will carry that phrase into the years. The others bear their injuries to the rear. Richardson arranges with the Black Watch to cover the tank against capture and leaves the crew's Lewis guns to strengthen the line. The fortress will not be taken tonight. It will sit, a lump in a field, a symbol of a fight at the edge of possibility. Pause here and consider the inversion. Tanks were designed to break trench warfare by moving through it. Fray Bentos achieves its effect by not moving at all. When the plan failed, the purpose changed, from breakthrough to denial, from attack to anchor. Its value over 60-plus hours is not miles gained, but squares of ground denied to the enemy and denied to disaster. That should not be surprising. It is how systems evolve. An invention enters war with one job, the war gives it another. The numbers show that shift. A Mark IV male carries 2 short-barreled 6-pounder guns and machine guns, enough to dominate a football field's worth of ground at short range. Its armor, 6 to 12 millimeters, shrugs off rifle fire at distance, but not concentrated field artillery. It lacks a radio. It is slow. It is finicky in mud. Under those constraints, the highest payoff comes not from speed, but from presence. In August 1917, presence is what matters to the infantry trying to hold waterlogged lines under concrete machine gun nests. A steel box in the wrong place becomes, briefly, the right tool. Consider the crew behaviors that made the difference. First, discipline. The standing orders about gun locks and maps sound procedural. They are strategic. They define the exit before the fight starts. Second, communication. In a world without radio, missions crawling is a communications plan at human scale, closing a loop with risk because the alternative is worse. Third, resource management. Ammunition counted by handfuls is not a metaphor. It is the rhythm of survival. Fourth, role rotation. Pain and fatigue degrade aim. The crew trade places not for comfort but for accuracy. Each of these behaviors is teachable. Each scales. Now pull back from the micro. Third, Ypres is a campaign of increments. The opening day of Passchendaele in July 1917 carries hopes and slogans about combined arms and creeping barrages. August grinds those into shell holes and mud. For the tanks, the weather is a principal enemy. They arrive with higher expectations than the terrain can sustain. Reports follow of drowned engines, broken gearboxes, smashed sponsons. Crews learn and adapt. Engineers add unditching beams and rails to roofs. Infantry learn to pace the tank's movement, to protect their flanks, to use their shadow even when they fail to move. Fray Bentos is the extreme case, the outlier that proves the pattern. It cannot move. It still helps. A smaller reveal hides inside the name. Why Fray Bentos? Because Richardson had sold that brand of canned meat in civilian life. A grocery agent in Nottingham names his tank for a label on a tin, a label that meant shelf life and reliability, cheap protein for workers, and time saved for families. In Flanders, the name becomes a promise that a steel box will hold. A kitchen product becomes a martial symbol because people thread their past into their present to make fear manageable. That's not romantic, it's human. What happened next made the pattern obvious. After the Fray Bentos incident, tank doctrine continued to evolve toward coordination and logistics. The fortress by accident taught simple lessons: provide more reliable recovery gear, improve signaling, ensure infantry recognition to reduce friendly fire, write standing orders that survive shock, drill crews in denial procedures. The doctrine of move fast and crush wire remained, but it gained its shadow. When you cannot move, hold. Later offensives, Cambrai in November 1917 most famously, would show what tanks could do when ground and preparation aligned. Hundreds of machines, surprise, dry soil, deep objectives, a first-day breakthrough measured in miles instead of yards. But even there, when the attack slowed, the same fortress logic returned. A tank in a bad place still needed to become a strong point. The Fray Bentos crew returned to service as far as wounds allowed. Richardson would see action again in another tank, informally dubbed Fray Bentos II by those who knew the story, and served to war's end. Hill, cited for his conduct, carried his neck wound into memory. Misson, decorated for running through fire to stop his own side from shelling the tank, became the symbol of quiet, practical courage that war rewards too rarely. Maury's Distinguished Conduct Medal locked in the narrative of a gunner who fought on despite injury. The military medals to Hayton, Arthurs, Budd, and Binley acknowledge that survival is a team act, even when the citations are written for individuals. Together, the 9 made the most decorated tank crew of the war. There is another layer of consequence, material, not moral. The physical tank, stuck for days, became a target and then an obstacle that both sides worked around. Rain buried its marks. Salvage crews and artillery finished the job. The immediate terrain learned from it. Infantry on both sides adjusted routes. Sappers noted where ground swallowed weight and where it did not. Maps shaded differently in later editions. It is easy to miss those changes in histories that prefer arrows and breakthroughs. It is harder to miss them if you have stood in a field where a box once sat and now does not. The numbers tell a last story. More than 60 hours, 9 men, 1 killed, 8 wounded, dozens of German rushes checked. At least 2 codenamed positions, Somme Farm and Gallipoli, suppressed long enough for British infantry to fight, fall back, and fight again. 1 communications loop closed under fire. 1 simple white rag used to reduce friendly fire. 2 6-pounder guns saved from capture by removing their locks. 3 Lewis guns handed over to the Black Watch to strengthen a line. These are small figures when set against the scale of the Western Front. They matter because scale is built from small numbers done right. The climax, if you seek one, is not the shootout at the end, but the moment the crew stepped into the night, carrying knowledge as carefully as weapons. The breech locks in pockets, the maps under jackets, the understanding that their job was no longer to take ground, but to deny an enemy a machine and a narrative. They walked back as professionals who had changed their mission to match reality. That is the pivot that reframes everything that came before. The thesis is simple. Early tanks were less about speed than about stubbornness. In mud and under fire, their greatest strength was not movement, but the ability to become instant fortresses wherever they stopped. Time moves on. Fray Bentos as an object is gone. The brand name still sits on supermarket shelves, tins that rattle with their own long history. The name on the tank outlasted the tank. That is memory working the way it often does, attaching itself to what we can hold. The soldiers' names carry the weight that matters. Donald Hickling Richardson, George Hill, Robert Francis Misson, William Maury, Ernest W. Hayton, Frederick C. Arthurs, Percy Edgar Budd, James H. Binley, Ernest Hans Brady, a roll call spoken at normal speed but heard at half speed. Return now to the opening image. The engine coughs, steadies. Hill leans into the tillers. Misson braces. The tank moves into dawn. At that moment, it is a weapon designed to push. 2 days later, the same steel is a bunker that refuses to be taken. The contrast is the point. Not through momentum, but through resolve. Not through sweeping victory, but through refusal to collapse. Not through myth, but through procedures followed under pressure. The universal takeaway is not a platitude about bravery. It is a practical rule. In complex systems, design for success, drill for failure. Tanks were designed to break the trench system. Fray Bentos shows how they also had to function when the system broke them. The crew lived because they had rules that told them what to do when the plan died, because they communicated across fog that could have killed them, because they used a machine's strengths even when the machine could not move. The field east of St. Julian is quiet now. Grass maps the old lines badly. Drainage ditches are straighter. Concrete shows at odd angles where pillboxes cracked. You could walk past the spot without knowing. But if you stop and look, if you press a palm to the idea of a half-buried shape in mud, you can feel what happened there. Not a charge, not a rout, but a long, unglamorous hold. A tank that became a fortress, and men who made that fortress mean something.